as a prepper, you do not have to make the same mistakes as the military just because they're the military. And even they don't have enough ammunition. And you should ask yourself the question, do you? You can actually learn a lot about their whole situation that's going on right now and apply it to your preparedness in order to kind of have some better foresight as to what might come in the future. And what do I mean by that? Well, first and foremost, the Biden administration on November 20th just announced a new $100 million aid package to Ukraine. And that includes 3 million rounds of small arms munitions. And in this video, I'm going to focus on small arms munitions because that's what matters more to us here in this community, right? So of course, there's a lot of other stuff in that aid package, but small arms munitions is what we're paying attention to. That might sound like a lot, but in reality, Ukrainian armed forces stand at around 1 million people at this point. So that's only 3 rounds per person if you want to look at it that way. Of course, not every single person is going to need small arms munitions, but you understand what I'm saying when it comes to the math on that. Sounds like a lot, but it's really not. And since the start of this war, the US has actually sent 300 million plus rounds of small arms munitions to Ukraine, which really only equates to about 300 rounds per person. So even with all that, and even with all the aid packages and everything else we've been sending to them, the US military is now kind of freaking out because they're realizing that we're not actually prepared for a long-term sustained conflict with a near-peer adversary based on our current production levels and stockpile. And this is why you should apply this to your preparedness, because we can learn from their mistakes and not make them ourselves. Now, I do want to mention that Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel. And of course, they always help me out with getting more prepared or possibly working on projects like this one, which I call the most communist gun that I currently own. But hey, big thanks to Midway USA for always making it happen. Now, Business Insider actually put out an article on November 19th discussing how the US military is rethinking how much ammo to produce and how much to stockpile based on observations of the Ukraine conflict. And Douglas R. Bush, Assistant Secretary for the Army of Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology, said the Army began making investments over a year ago in our organic and commercial industrial base to accelerate production and improve capacity for 155mm and other munitions in order to meet demands for Ukraine, allied partners, and US stockpile requirements. Now, the big takeaway here that you can apply to yourself is that they only started a year ago, aka after the war started. It took an entire conflict between East and West, basically, if you want to look at the Russian-Ukraine conflict in that parameter. It took that whole conflict for the US military to say, hold on, we actually don't have enough ammo stockpiled, and we don't have the ability to produce it either to the degree that we would need if we found ourselves in a similar situation. That should raise some red flags for you, because we've had plenty of time to prepare. We've had plenty of time to put together supply chains and different forms of manufacturing here stateside in order to make sure we have what we need if a war were to break out. But we got too comfortable. Even the US military got too comfortable and said, you know what, we're good. We don't actually need all that much. And now they're ramping up production and freaking out about our strategic reserves because we're running out. And we're not even technically directly in this war, right? We're just supporting allies at this point in time. This is not a good sign, at least in my opinion. And you can apply this to your preparedness method as well to see that you have to do these things before the war breaks out, before SHTF, before whatever the big one is, right? So learn from that. Now, there's something else I want to talk about here that's also imperative because it shows where they failed, and you can apply that to how you can avoid that type of failure. But I do want to mention that Genesis Gold Group is a huge supporter of the channel, and if you want to back your financial assets with stabilized wealth like gold and silver, make sure you go to magicpreppergold.com and see what they can do for you, because they can roll your retirement accounts over to a gold-backed IRA. They can send precious metals directly to your door. There's a lot of things they can do, and they're not tied to the CCP, and they don't offer free stuff that doesn't exist. So big thanks to Genesis Gold Group. If you guys go there and get gold and silver, I'll get more, well, in this case, steel and lead, and I'll have a good time with it. So an article came out on November 21st by a company called TS2 Space, which you're probably not aware of because they're a telecommunications company, but the name of the article was Strategic Implications of Ammunition Shortages in Modern Warfare, and it had an excellent FAQ section after the article. And I'll go ahead and link that article down below so you guys can check it out if you want, just because I thought it was some interesting information, especially coming from this type of company. It's not necessarily mainstream news by any means. But here's what I found interesting. Section 3 in the FAQ section said, NATO has underestimated the amount of ammo required for sustained operations. And you hear that a lot here in this community, right? How much ammo are you going to possibly need? How could you possibly need thousands of rounds of ammo? First off, forget the argument of you can't carry that with you. If you think you're guaranteed to have to leave or walk somewhere wherever you are, then you should be planning on how you can get somewhere where you might not have to leave. That's probably the first step if you can. But at the same time, you might not ever leave. We don't know what the situation is going to be. So don't use that excuse. But either way, what I'm saying is that NATO underestimated how much ammo they would need. So I would say it's probably pretty easy for someone like myself to underestimate that amount as well, okay? And then section 4 of the FAQ section said, the US depleting strategic reserves exposed vulnerabilities and hurt relations with others needing defense resources during a conflict. Well, that tells us a couple things too. First off, by depleting any of your stockpile or your strategic reserves, you're hurting yourself and you're opening up vulnerabilities because now you don't have as much capability anymore as you used to have, right? So if you didn't stockpile enough and you had to dip into it in order to maintain proficiency or who knows what else you had to do, well, now you're not as well prepared and now you're not as immune to whatever might be coming your way. But the other thing that I thought was very interesting there was the fact that it actually is hurting our relations with our allies who might need those resources during a conflict. And that actually leans into the concept of community, right? So in a long-term survival situation, we want to have community. We want people to be able to get together and team up and have each other's backs. But if I can't help supply some of these people that might be, I don't know, allowing me to get some sleep or allowing me to not have to watch my 6 24/7, well, if I can't supply them, then they might not be able to fulfill that role. And of course, it's not my job to supply them, but that stockpile allows me to continue that relationship as well as basically making them a harder target in the process, which allows them to function in those capacities more easily for a longer period of time. And it's just the same as approaching it from a countrywide perspective, right? So the US does this for other countries, which helps them, maintain these relationships and have better strategic defenses around the world, right? Well, you can apply the same thing to your neighbors. Hey, this allows my neighbors to be better armed and better protected, which means that my whole neighborhood is safer now, which means if there's any outside threats coming our way, we can deal with it when we need to. My nose was running. How did I even know that, right? So here's the thing. I thought this was all great information to kind of evaluate and to consider when it comes to your preparedness level and your ammunition levels and everything else. So let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Do you think that the military being this unprepared for these types of conflicts is concerning as well as surprising? Wouldn't you think that we would have had plenty of munitions ready to go and the capacity to produce them? I think right now they're saying we produce something like 14,000 155 millimeter shells every month along those lines. And they're hoping to get that number up to like 30,000 by next year and then eventually to 100,000 by 2025. Like that's how far behind we are if they think that's what's required. We need 100,000 a month and right now we're at 14,000. 14% efficiency or capacity is a failure, right? So don't find yourself in that part of the equation. Make sure you do what you can to insulate yourself from having that issue down the road. It's not about knowing for sure how it's going to go, but it is about not being, I guess, let's just say upset that you didn't take those steps when you could have. And I think that our military is currently upset that they didn't take those steps when they could have, and we should definitely learn from that. So anything else you need from me, go to magicprepper.com. And besides that, it's going to be it for Magic Prepper. I got you.